Good afternoon, Thursday podcast from Alberta Enterprise Group, and it is a great honor for me, John Liston, who is the Vice President of Alberta Enterprise Group, to interview our President, Danielle Smith. And Danielle Smith has recently, in fact today, had a document published from the School of Public Policy in Calgary, at University of Calgary. And so we want to talk to her a little bit about some of the background, some of the material in it, and most importantly, how do we move Alberta forward? How do we stop looking in the rearview mirror and start looking in the windscreen of the car? The rearview mirror is small, the windscreen is big, and we've got an opportunity in front of us that we think is pretty exciting. So welcome, Danielle. And
my great pleasure, John. You know, it's sort of funny for people we've talked so much over the last 6 weeks, but because we haven't been able to be face-to-face until yesterday. Yesterday was the first day we actually got to meet face-to-face. So I'm delighted to be talking to you again over Zoom, which we've gotten so used to over the last little while.
So first of all, congratulations on being a published academic author today. Very exciting. But let's before we go there, let's make sure everybody understands who Danielle Smith is. I think you have an obvious reputation and following that you've worked hard to earn. But tell me about Alberta. Are you born and raised? What's your background?
I was born and raised in Alberta, and so were my parents. And you have to go back to kind of my great-grandparents to find my family heritage. So my great-great-grandfather came over from the Galicia region just after World War I. And so he has Ukrainian heritage. And my great-great-grandmother was Cherokee. So she came from the United States, married an American man. And ultimately, it was her children who came up to Canada. I also have an Irish great-grandmother who came over in the 1800s as well. But after that, I mean, all of my family was born and raised in Western Canada. And so when I know it's funny when you talk about Calgary and how much it's boomed. I was talking to someone just recently saying, you never meet anybody who was born and raised in Calgary. Well, I was born and raised in Calgary, as were my parents. And we've got memories from when it used to be, we used to feel like just a little small town and you could get anywhere in 20 minutes. And now it's grown so immensely. But one of the things that I've loved about the career that I've had is that I've been able to travel literally all over the province. I've been everywhere you can possibly imagine. Playing paintball up in High Level, I think, is the furthest north I ended up going, but also all the way down in Raymond and the Cardston area to look at irrigation and meet with people down there, and then east and west as well. So I really feel like it doesn't matter where you go in any part of this province, you have people who have a very similar story to me, that they had great grandparents who came here for the opportunity. Great grandparents who either settled land because it's the first opportunity for them to be able to do it, or they were able to escape oppressive regimes. And it even goes back to whatever ethnicity, whatever country in the world. You can go back in Alberta history and you can find people who have their ancestors here. And that's something that I really became aware of as I traveled the province. It's a pretty unique and amazing place.
It's I want to explore this more because I think it's a really important part of our fabric. And each of us has a different story, but it all kind of weaves. It's fascinating. Let's just touch briefly on this paper in terms of the School of Public Policy at University of Calgary has released this document today. What is the collective project about?
It's about looking for the challenges and opportunity for Alberta. I think that we've been in a funk, not just because of the last year. I think perhaps it began with the 2008, 2009 downturn. That may have been the first big hit that we took as a province. And just as we were sort of clawing back and recovering and oil prices had surged, well, then we got walloped again in 2014 with another big hit from which it didn't really recover, and then we got hit by COVID. So it's just been one hit after another, and I really feel like what the policy school is trying to do is bring together sort of collective minds to say, we do have challenges, but we can overcome them. And I think that that really is a fundamentally Albertan characteristic. So a lot of different proposals about what the biggest challenges are facing us and what some of the solutions might be. I personally have so much confidence in the business sector, the entrepreneurial sector, the free enterprise sector. I don't really have much fear that the free enterprise is just going to kick into high gear as soon as all of the restrictions are unloaded. And I don't have much fear in the charitable or nonprofit sector. I'm on the board of a nonprofit, and we've had to repurpose and refocus over the last year and a half too, and we've been successful. So I have no problem believing that those two major sectors are going to get into recovery extremely quickly when all the restrictions are gone. Where I'm most worried is in our provincial government and our government sector, generally speaking, that they do not match the same level of innovation and creativity and willingness to try new things that we see in either the nonprofit or the private sector, and that's where I think our biggest challenge is going to be.
So, just on the School of Public Policy, how many documents are coming out? Do you have any idea?
I think they have commissioned 20 chapters. And so they asked me to write an opening chapter in what will ultimately be a book, but they are releasing chapters every so often. So they've already released the chapters from Trevor Toome and Bev Dalby. I spoke with them in a School of Public Policy seminar a couple of weeks ago. There's another seminar coming up in a couple of weeks' time. If I can sneak a look at my phone to advertise what that's going to be, I'll let you know. But I'll be moderating that event as well on June the 16th. And then they released my paper today, and so I'm delighted to be a part of the process, because I think there's some brilliant people putting forward some brilliant ideas. And it's interesting. One of those brilliant people is Jack Mintz, who's highly connected with the School of Public Policy, because he used to lead it, but now he's a scholar associated with them. And you may have seen he just got appointed to the board of Alberta Health Services. So that bodes well, I think, for some of the areas that we're going to be talking about today, about where some big fixes need to be had if we're going to move forward.
It's interesting, you're talking about three names there in terms of Bev Dalby, and then Jack Mintz and Trevor Toome that are brilliant minds and have been very open at sharing their brilliance. And I honestly, I use a lot of their material when we're talking to people about, how does this province move forward. I want to go back and so my background's different. And my parents came as immigrants in 1956. So I'm a first generation born Canadian. My three siblings were born in Europe, and then I was born. My three of us were born here, and so I was raised as a first generation Canadian. I then worked in lived in three and worked in all 10 provinces, and so one of the things that I've been given is a different perspective, and the opportunity to be in Newfoundland or find me a place in Canada that isn't just gorgeous and outstanding, incredible country. But often we hear this thing about Alberta's different. Mm-hmm. And I've had the chance to live in Ontario and live in Manitoba, work in the other places. And there is a difference, but it's hard to articulate, right? Everybody has a reason. Jack Mintz talked a little bit about it's this volatility of our world that Alberta has been blessed with. Many would consider it a curse. He says it's a blessing because what it's done is it's really prepared us for the next cycle. And so we never get to the bottom of a cycle thinking we're done. We get to the bottom going, woohoo, we're on our way back up. And so let's talk about that difference. You've written about it in your document. What is so unique in your eyes about Alberta?
Well, it's interesting that you're kind of a first generation Canadian. Your story is a lot like my husband's. My husband is also first generation Canadian because his parents came over from Ireland and from England and actually met here and married. And that it's funny when you travel the province. You meet so many people, and we always ask about heritage. I'm not sure, maybe that's a Canadian obsession. I don't know if it's quite the same obsession in other countries, but it is here. And it's remarkable to hear some of the founding stories that people have. So when I went back and looked at what our founding story is, it's funny what you get taught in school. We're having a great conversation about Canadian history now and what should be in the social studies class. And we do have a Canadian history of two founding nations, English and France, battling it out, right? And the four founding regions, Upper Canada and Lower Canada, and two Atlantic provinces. But it's interesting in the way the story is told. I've never really felt that resonates with me, even though I've been to some of the French settled areas in Alberta, like Plamondon, as a for instance. Their first language in Plamondon is French. And you know that when you go up there, you will meet people who are Francophone first, who also know English, but it is a Francophone community. So we do have some of that French settlement that came out here. But when you're thinking about what our history was around that founding time, that was when we had the Hudson Bay Company out here trading with our Indigenous peoples in the fur trade. When you think of who came here as some of our original founders, you'll find stories about Sam Livingston, who came from originally from Ireland, but came to North America in the Klondike Gold Rush. And after making his fortune, or maybe not, ended up settling in what was to become Calgary. And this was in sort of the latter part of the 1800s. Then you also have the story of John Ware. And I heard about John Ware when I was involved in advocacy for property rights. I'd met the Western Stockgrowers Association, and they talked about this absolutely beloved cowboy of Black heritage who came from America. And he came with a bunch of cattle and realized they needed some professional skilled ranchers here. So he stayed. When you go up to Lac La Biche, you'll hear the story of the first Muslim pioneer who also learned Cree so that he could engage in the fur trade. And as you look through the history of every one of our foundational cultural communities, they all have deep roots in Canada. Ukrainians who settled mostly in the Edmonton area. You look at even at our Sikh population. There are pictures from the Frank Slide down in Crowfoot Pass of individuals who were there at that time, and Chinese immigrants came here in the late 1800s. So I've always kind of felt like Alberta has been that cultural melting pot right from the get-go. And maybe it's because we started a little bit later than the rest of the country, but that changes the character of a nation or of a region. It allowed us to build Alberta on the basis of trade, on the basis of community, on the basis of common interest, on the basis of trying to forge a living on this really hard land, hard prairie and forested areas that needed to be cleared. And I just think that has been, it's kind of been bred into the bone here now from all aspects. When people come to Alberta, there is something quite different about this place. And I think it is that entrepreneurial drive. Maybe it's because it was such a hard place to make a living that just when you think you're down, you got to turn it around and come back up again. I think to Jack Mintz's point, one of the things that hadn't occurred to me, but it makes perfect sense, is when you look into the world of economic literature and they talk about one of the essential elements of entrepreneurship, they talk about creative destruction. And those two words together, you wouldn't think would go together, but they do. It's so necessary that for something brand new to emerge, something else has to be destroyed. We wouldn't have cars if we didn't destroy the horse and buggy industry. We wouldn't have been able to develop an industry around fossil fuels and hydrocarbons if we had stayed clinging to wood and whale oil. And so to me, this whole idea that when you have large economic calamity, that it sows the seeds for entrepreneurship, that just makes sense to me. And we're probably more than anywhere else, because of the boom and bust cycle, which we hate so much, we complain about so much, we want to mitigate so much. It could well be that that's kind of central to our success, is that it clears out a lot of resources and a lot of fallow time for us to sit back and be creative and figure out what we're going to do next. And so maybe embracing the booms and the busts is part of the Alberta character, and maybe that's part of why we've been so successful, no matter what gets thrown at us.
It's funny. You talk about all the different groups. Again, you mentioned the Sikhs and the Muslims, and so when my parents came out, their first house was across the street from a lady named Mrs. Hamden. Siti was her name because she's the grandmother, and they were Muslim, and so there were my European parents arriving in. The people across the street had been there long before, because they had arrived in the early 1900s in Fort Chip, and they were traders. It was actually called Hamden Trading, and they worked. If you really understand Fort Chip, it's got this incredible balance of Cree and Muslim and all these things that were developed. So. I really think that you're onto something there in terms of how it defines us. That we weren't conquerors, we weren't conquered. We've got this fabric that builds together as opposed to tears apart.
Yeah, completely. And I guess I also feel, especially as we're all going through trying to process a lot of feelings about what we heard happened at the Kamloops residential schools, I think that this is the other aspect, is that we have a foundation, I think, of working in partnership with our First Nations on economic issues. And if we can kind of embrace that history and work towards reconciliation by having those kind of economic partnerships and reaching out a hand to ensure that we're developing our resources together, that we're allowing and helping for communities to develop wealth together, that we're giving opportunities for those communities together, I think it's fundamentally Albertan, and I think it's really the strongest path that we have to finally addressing some of the hardships and evils that were committed in the past. And so I think as well that Alberta has done, and our energy sector, it's always amazed me whenever I meet individuals in the energy sector, how many of them have long, deep, abiding relationships with members of First Nations communities, because it made sense to develop those partnerships. And when you have a long relationship with somebody, that is going to lead to mutual understanding and reconciliation. So I know we've been talking about all the newcomers to Alberta, but I don't think that negates the great partnership that so many of our industry has had in the past with First Nations. And I just hope that we can get through this period of time so that we can go forward and forge ahead with a promising future that includes everybody. I think that's what we all want.
I think, two interviews you did recently, one with Stephen Buffalo of the Indian Resource Council, and one of them with Dale Swampy. You just see the character of those people and the integration of us as a province. And I think it's we, not us and them.
Completely. I mean, Dale Swampy told me that they're having a major convention in the fall. I think planned for it to be in September, where they bring together all of the chiefs who are involved in industry development, looking at job creation, developing businesses. So I think we're at a really exciting time in our history for developing those partnerships.
Absolutely, it's exciting. So let's then go into, if that's the history of Alberta and kind of the underpinning of the fabric. Let's talk about how we've evolved. I often tell the story of people going up the Athabasca River in a canoe and seeing this black stuff oozing out of the sand on the side, and most of us would just avoid the darn stuff. This crazy province took it and turned it into an industry, and the earth was just pushing it out. Right, it wasn't like we were going digging for it, and so we have this ability to take and Alberta's been gifted with resources. It doesn't matter, whether it's lithium or I was talking today about helium, hydrogen, ammonia, and how it's going to play a role in shipping hydrogen, all these things of our resources. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the resource and the communication you've got within that document.
Oh, absolutely. As you were talking, since we've just been speaking about First Nations, I recall recently speaking with former Chief Jim Boucher from the Fort McKay First Nation, and I had a chance to visit up there, and it's a remarkable community. Tom Flanagan has done some research in looking at the wealth of communities in Alberta, and the Fort McKay First Nation is the wealthiest community in Alberta, including non-Indigenous communities. So that's just sort of a testament to how much partnership that there has been up as that resource has been developed. So when I look at Alberta's history, it strikes me that we have had multiple booms when it comes to our energy sector. That we had a conventional boom in oil and gas, and then that kind of got wiped out with the NEP, the National Energy Program, through the 70s and early 80s. But then we sort of pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps, and we figured out a way to turn, as you mentioned, this resource bitumen that had no value, no one knew what to do with it, into an incredibly valuable resource. In fact, it's probably going to be more valuable in the long run as we figure out all of the amazing uses that we can put it to. And so that was sort of responsible for our next boom. And then we're sort of in this other period now where we're wondering what comes next. And I think that we're on the cusp of another energy boom. And it's related to our ability to continue to find innovations. We have been the target of this tar sands campaign. I call it that because that's what those who are behind it called it. We have been subjected to that. And I think that we've been smeared unfairly in our industry about all of the ways in which our industry innovates. So you have an issue, for instance, with oil sands tailing ponds development. So what happens? Our industry goes and creates steam assisted gravity drainage. And so you end up solving that problem. You have an issue with, for instance, the transportation of bitumen in liquid form by adding diluent. So some smart entrepreneurs from Bit Crude and Canapucks figure out a way to transport it in semi-solid form, so it can be put in container ships and transported that way. You see that there are all kinds of barriers that the industry ends up getting put in front of them, and they find solutions for them. The latest one, of course, being the issue of carbon dioxide emissions. And so what's happened? Well, the entrepreneurs put their thinking caps on and found a way to do carbon capture and storage. And now that we've found a way to capture this, which is 80% of the hard stuff is trying to capture carbon dioxide, I've got a bunch of smart guys thinking, maybe we can make better use of this rather than just storing it underground. Maybe we can turn it into concrete. Maybe we can turn it into carbon black. Maybe we can turn it into carbon fiber and develop construction materials out of it. So to me, this is the fundamental character of those who have been in the petroleum sector. I remember one of my very first introductions to the petroleum sector, aside from growing up in a family where dad was always in the industry, but was Pierre Desrochers, who works at a university in British Columbia. And he was at a conference when I was in 1997. It was called the Liberty Summer Seminar. And he had this incredible graph showing a barrel of oil and said, when we started off with wanting to find a replacement for whale oil, and we found kerosene was the only useful thing that came out of this. And there's all this extra sludge. And then we kept turning it into useful products. We found gasoline, and we found diesel, and we found the ability to make asphalt and petrochemicals, and it goes on. And so I've always just looked at the issue of carbon dioxide as been just, here's another byproduct that we have to find a useful purpose for. And I'm very excited to see that we're really on the cusp of doing that. So I have great enthusiasm and optimism for this industry. I think it has the ability to innovate in a way that is inspiring to not only me, but I think other industries. I think that this kind of, let's just find a problem, put some smart people around it, let's solve this problem, let's move on to the next one. I think that is fundamentally the character of Alberta's, and it's fundamentally the character of all of our industries. So as we start broadening out into other sectors, I think we're going to see that same level of innovation. So to me, it just feels to me like Alberta, I've been sitting here, I think I described it as a bit of a fallow field. We've been sitting here thinking, dreaming, being creative. And now when we're allowed to get back together and collaborate, I just think we're set to boom. I think it's really exciting. I think we're on the cusp of something amazing.
It's funny. I ran into a lady the other day talking about her Ukrainian ancestry. And in the Ukraine, if you had trees on your land, that meant you were wealthy. And so when they were given land, they said, come out to this place called Canada. We'll give you a plot of land and you can make it work. And so they were all thrilled because they asked for land with trees that would make them wealthy. Well, when they got here and they were up in the Smoky Lake area, all they had was trees. And so now they had to break the land, take the trees down and turn it into farm country, it's extraordinary farm country today. But they were given the same gift, which is are those trees a problem or an opportunity? And they turned into, you just roll up your sleeves and make it happen. It's not like they were going back.
It's so funny as you started telling that story. I was thinking, oh boy, they must not have settled in High River. I own a 1903 house, and we have a picture of what it looked like at that time, and it was nothing but literally bald prairie. I don't think that there was a tree as far as the eye could see. It must have been because of all the bison grazing that happened down in these parts for so long.
It may be why the Ukrainians all came to Edmonton, Vegreville, Mundare, Lamont, all those areas, and have formed the culture of Alberta.
It's so funny. I wouldn't have known that connection. That is hilarious.
So then you see, you have two choices when you see a situation. You can see the problems or you can see the opportunities.
Completely.
Right? And that's, I think, is this cultural piece that, again, Jack Mintz spoke about, that you're talking about, and it's not just the oil and gas industry. It's Alberta. We happen to have found the oil and gas, but we've also, developed all sorts of other areas. And do you want to talk about some of the products that the CO2 is going to be useful for? Do you want to?
It's been really amazing, and I know that I will probably have to do a podcast on that in particular, because I've now gone to a couple of seminars where that has been explored, and I think one of the most exciting opportunities is going to be in hydrogen. There's going to be so many different opportunities that come out of creating hydrogen, because the most efficient way of getting hydrogen is to take methane and to split it out. And methane is CH4, so you get 4 hydrogen atoms and 1 C. So you're still dealing with a carbon problem. But I recall years ago seeing this company down in Medicine Hat called CanCarb, and they take the methane, they split out the hydrogen, and then they use the hydrogen as the fuel to split more methane so that they can get the carbon black. And carbon black is an incredibly valuable product. If you remember the O-ring problem that we had during the Challenger shuttle disaster, it was an O-ring failure, but they create that product out of this material. All of the rubber that you have in your vehicle is made out of carbon black. So you can create high value products out of it. And I remember talking to them at the time saying, you've just solved carbon dioxide. So why isn't this technology more broadly available? And at the time they said, we can produce more carbon black than there would ever be a need for. And now as I'm talking to entrepreneurs and they're saying, gee, carbon black is really valuable. So I'm hoping to introduce a few people to that technology. But I think we don't know what we don't know about the ability to create this pure carbon dioxide stream and this pure carbon stream. So I've told you what carbon black is already used for, but carbon fiber is another example of how you could create a product that can replace steel. Now, if you talk to anybody who's in construction now, we've got some supply chain problems on steel. It's also a very high greenhouse gas footprint to produce steel as well as concrete. And so there's a challenge there. But imagine being able to take our natural gas industry, develop a useful stream for hydrogen, but then also create this carbon stream that could develop a new steel industry. Now, if you could create an alternative building material, then think of all of the value-added products that would come out of that. I can't even list them all. So that's sort of 3 things there. Michael Binion with Quest Air Energy, he's been, and the Modern Miracle Network, he's the one who introduced me to a few other really interesting companies. The carbon upcycling is one that takes carbon dioxide from the air. And one of the things that they create is fly ash. And we've heard from our friends in the concrete business that fly ash is one of the replacements that they're going to have to find once we shut down our coal plants. So wouldn't that be amazing that if you're sequestering the carbon dioxide anyway, and you're able to turn it into fly ash so that you can create some durable, useful cement and concrete materials, which, as we now know, is the second most consumed product in the world aside from water. We'll never get away from concrete. There are also companies that are taking the carbon dioxide stream to turn into industrial minerals, so magnesium carbonate and others, and a variety of uses for that. And then finally, the one that I find the most interesting is Airco, AIRCO, that has turned it into a pure alcohol, and then they make vodka out of it. And a vodka that's good. It's even passed international taste tests. So as I started looking into this issue, and I've been looking into it for years, because the Carbon X Prize really was the the genesis for a lot of these ideas of how can you take something that's seen as a waste product and turn it into something of value. So I started interviewing some of these companies, but we're now on the cusp of seeing some of these things go to scale so that they could actually be implemented. And my attitude, anytime I talk to somebody who says that they've got a carbon capture and sequestration project, I say, oh, why do you want to bury that? That's going to be really valuable. You'll be able to create a new revenue stream out of it. So I think we're on the cusp of something pretty amazing here. And if we're going to find it, those answers anywhere, I firmly believe it's going to be in Alberta.
Well, and beyond Alberta, it's going to be the entrepreneur. And that's, one of the pieces that I think you talk to well in your document. Ultimately, how do we get the entrepreneurs? How do we free up the entrepreneurs to have this genius? And you and I are lucky enough in our role to spend all of our time with entrepreneurs, and they typically don't see problems; they see opportunities. And so I always joke, when you put them in a room, there's just sparks because there's all these ideas that are flying, and so we have to create a culture to free up the entrepreneur to do what they do. And I just think, one of the things that's happened over the last while is social media and many other vehicles have really created a rhetoric around in entrepreneurial business owners and haven't given them the proper respect, because it's a rare breed. It's by supply and demand, the world needs them because there's not enough of them.
Isn't that true?
You have to value this genius that they have, and you have to unleash it. And it's yours and my role to do that.
Yeah. Can I add on that, because there's another aspect that I didn't get to, and you and I talk about this all the time. So, I mean, whenever I've been talking to members of Alberta Enterprise Group, and I remember talking to Rosenau, which is one of the biggest trucking companies in the country, and it was Granddad who started off delivering dental equipment or dental supplies in the back of a pickup truck. And now today, what do they have? Something like 700 trucks or something. It's massive and multi-hubs. And that's the thing when you're talking to entrepreneurs who've created something that huge, is it almost sounds like that, we just decided to open up a shop there, and we just decided to expand over there, and it grows organically. And then they create something that's so immense, employing so many people and providing so much value. And I don't even know if they realize that what they've done is truly spectacular and unique. And so that's one of the things I love about Alberta Enterprise Group, is how we're able to showcase that. The other thing I'd say, though, about entrepreneurs, and this too, is that anytime you talk to somebody who's been really successful in business, it doesn't take long for them to talk about the passionate involvement that they have in some charitable organizations, some nonprofits, some charities, some fundraising that they do. And most of them don't brag about it, but maybe they should brag about it a little bit more, because I think that was another thing about the Alberta character that I really appreciate about our entrepreneurs, is that there's this recognition that we want them to do well, because we know that they give back to the community when they do well. And you go to the Stollery, or you go to the University of Calgary campus, and you will see buildings named after some of the most successful business people in Alberta. So I like the fact that we can celebrate that. And I think we need to get away from the rhetoric of pounding away on those who are the job creators and the wealth creators. And as you say, get out of the way and let them do their work.
I run a golf tournament for a charity. Last year, we weren't able to host it because of the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
To a company, they said, keep the money. No disrespect, we weren't in it for the golf. They donated all the money to the charity. It's for Sports Central, helping kids play sports that can't afford it.
Yeah.
And that's your example of just the their understanding of their responsibility, and they are the builders, and we have to continue to celebrate them and free them up to build. So let's talk about that. Let's go into a little bit of that entrepreneurial sense that we think Alberta is built on, and to some degree, it's some things are getting in the way. And so the question is, how do we remove the barriers and get this thing rolling? So, where do you want to start on that?
Well, it's funny. I'm looking at Audrey. She sent it out. What about healthcare? Because a lot of my paper is about healthcare, but I needed to establish the foundation that this is not a problem of a lack of effort or drive or ability to generate revenue on the part of business. This is not a problem of a lack of diversity in the business sector. This is not a problem even of our nonprofits not doing their part. Because when you look at anytime we've had a major calamity in Alberta, it's been the nonprofit and charitable sector that's the first to step out, whether it was mucking out basements in southern Alberta when the floods hit, or whether it was providing necessaries to those who got evacuated from the Slave Lake fires or the Fort McMurray fires, or whether it was even during COVID, the number of private community groups that stepped up to deliver grocery services to people who were shut in their homes. To me, there's an incredible amount of entrepreneurship and responsiveness there. But where I see that we've had a failure in Alberta is I don't believe our government sector is anywhere near as innovative or entrepreneurial as Albertans are as a whole, and anywhere near as innovative and entrepreneurial as they need to be. And yes, healthcare, I'm talking about you. And I think that that's what we've seen in the last year, unfortunately, is that if we had had an entrepreneurial response in the healthcare system, they would have come up with different solutions than what they did. They wouldn't have followed the crowd and just decided everyone needs to be locked down because we can't figure out a way to address this. We can't figure out a way to do our staffing so that we can protect those in long-term care. We can't figure out a way to do a panel that would examine therapeutics so that if people did get sick, they had some kind of therapeutic that would prevent them from being hospitalized. That to me, I think, is the biggest tragedy, is that we discovered that our healthcare system, which we love so much, we pour half of all government revenue into it, only had the capacity to accommodate 450 people in ICU units in our entire province. Like, think about that for a minute. If we had some major natural disaster or some other type of catastrophe, our public healthcare system that we spend $23 billion on wouldn't be able to handle it. I wonder, I mean, when you think about the Pine Lake tornadoes that happened, I wonder if we'd even be able to handle that today. So how is it that we've gotten to a point where we're spending more money than we ever have, and we're getting less and less for it? Whether it's what I've just described on ICU capacity, or whether it's looking at the waiting list that we have, or whether it's the lengthy list that those who are waiting for a placement in long-term care for their loved ones. Why can't we do that more efficiently? We've got so many problems that all really point back, I think, to an inability to innovate in the healthcare sector. Because here's the problem: we have a $12 billion structural shortfall.
So I want to stop you first. Sorry.
Yeah.
Because one of the dangers you have is you, and so in my past as a business consultant coaching businesses. And very often, when you had certain problems, you needed to actually move back through different categories. There's kind of the mission and vision of the organization, and then there's the structures, and then there's the policies and the procedures, and then there's the people. And very often, if you think you have a people problem, you likely have a process or a structure problem. Mm-hmm. And so, we all know people in the healthcare system, and they're all great people. Right. That's probably the biggest thing for me is when we start to challenge some of these systems, people get their back up because, my father was a doctor, my sister's a nurse, and they're good people that care. And so I don't think it's a people issue. I think you have to move back into processes and structure before you can start to point at it. Am I wrong on that?
You're absolutely right that it's a structure issue. I mean, think about that for a minute. So what if somebody made you, John Liston, the person responsible at the helm of Alberta Health Services, and said, okay, here you go, here are the keys, and close to $20 billion. Off you go, fix it. No one is smart enough to manage their way through $20 billion worth of spending, micromanaging every single step along the way, and expect that they're going to get good results. I mean, I think we have this idea that if we just hire a really smart central planner, that really smart central planner will be able to figure it out. And I've never felt that way. I've always felt that, and again, I mentioned Schumpeter, but I'm from the Austrian School of Economics. I believe in spontaneous order, that we don't know all of the mechanisms that'll take place when you allow free people and free individuals to interact with each other and barter over prices and watch the supply and demand occur. Amazing things happen when you allow for things to be decentralized. And so this is the real problem that I think we've had in healthcare. And I don't know why it is politicians believe this, but it seems to me every politician that we've had, even and conservatives fall victim to this all the time. They think, well, the way that you fix the problem is you just have to get rid of all of those administrators. So you end up going from 17 health regions down to 9. And oh, well, that didn't actually fix things. So let's go from 9 health regions down to 1. And guess what? That really didn't fix things. So maybe the solution is not centralizing all of the decisions and expecting one person to be smart enough to figure out $20 billion worth of spending. Maybe the solution is that you actually have to let individuals who manage individual clinics and hospitals and local services have the freedom to innovate and try new and different things. And you will not get that, unfortunately, in a monopoly public system. You will not get that when everybody, no matter where you are, in whatever region, is not able to respond to local conditions and local needs. So I think this is the real problem that you face, is that anytime you say, the problem is the structure, the problem is the monopoly, you'll get the friends of Medicare saying, oh my goodness, you want 2-tier American style healthcare, and it freaks everybody out that they're going to bankrupt themselves in trying to cover essential care. And that is not what anybody is talking about at all. It's talking about we have to bring competition, we have to bring choice, we have to bring innovation, we've got to bring entrepreneurship into this system if we're going to have it become high performance. We've tried to do it this way since the 1980s. We have tried the monopoly approach. We just said, okay, more money, here you go, shoveling money over. And now we've kind of reached the end of the line here. We have spent as much as we possibly can on healthcare. It's now cannibalizing other areas of program spending. And it's just not up to the job it needs to be. It's not giving people the healthcare they want and need when they want and need it. And it essentially shut down in the last year for large parts of it because they couldn't handle a patient surge that you would expect a system of this size to be able to handle. So to me, we have to understand that it's the structure that's the problem. And if we're not prepared to deal with the structure, then we're not going to solve this problem. And there's implications of not solving this problem. I mean, the first implication is people don't get the care that they need. And I think we all know people who have waited years, especially if you have back surgery, sometimes 3 to 4 years before it's your turn up to get your treatment. We also are never going to solve our budget crisis, because if half of your money that gets generated is untouchable because nobody wants to talk about better ways of doing things, then it's just going to keep on escalating the cost. So you'll never solve your budget problems. And so if we don't solve our budget problems, how does this end? How can we keep on going on with $12 billion a year, each and every year, and sometimes more, accumulating to our provincial debt? At some point, the bankers say, we're not going to lend you any more money. And then you have to have a major surgery in order to fix it. And I think all of that's avoidable, but all roads lead back to healthcare. If we're not prepared to restructure healthcare, we're not going to solve any of these problems.
It's interesting. Again, my background is as a financial planner. And we have this really interesting concept in financial planning that you should have more coming in than going out. It's kind of step number one in a family's budget. And so sometimes you have to say no. And so that's one of the challenges, we continually have is on one side, you say, well, we're going to spend up to this number, and then we're going to say no. But when you say no, people don't like it. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, you say, well, we're going to meet every need and we'll worry about that thing later. And we're kind of at that later now, aren't we? Where we have a deficit of 12 billion and the interest on that. So now you have a certain amount of money going to healthcare and education. Those are our two primary eaters of provincial revenue. And then you have debt service is going to, pretty soon debt service is going to catch up to those other two. And it's, you kind of have to pay your debts, it turns out. So all of a sudden, we're not going to be able to do even what we're doing today if we continue to spend at a rate that we're spending at. And then you get into this world of, is it a spending problem? Is it a revenue problem? We'll talk about that.
Well, and I think that's how we have talked about it in the past is it a revenue problem? Is it a spending problem? And so those on the side of just give it more money, which we've done, as I've already said, and I don't think we should do that anymore. But those who are on that side just say, okay, well, just throw in a provincial sales tax, just add a sales tax and you can adjust it so that it fills the gap. Well, anyone who has tried to propose that, and admittedly, I floated that idea in a column in the last couple of years, there is no appetite for that in Alberta. No one wants, if you were to put it, as we would have to put the issue of a sales tax to a public referendum, it would fail. Because I think one of the things, when you talk about the uniqueness of Alberta, I think that a lot of people look at that as one of the things that differentiates us, and they don't want to lose it. But then on the other side, you'll have people say, well, just cut, but don't touch healthcare or education or infrastructure spending. And my friends, like I've often said to people when I'm trying to tell them just the way it works is you can't. That's too much of the budget. The vast majority of the budget are those three areas. And I don't want anybody to believe that you can gouge out $12 billion worth of spending and it won't have a massive, massive impact. I mean, to put some numbers around both of these, if you want to try to solve this on the revenue side, $12 billion, which is what we're short, is the entire amount of personal income taxes that Alberta already generates. If you wanted to solve a $12 billion problem on the spending side, you have to cut the entire K-12 and post-secondary education departments. These are huge, huge numbers. So you can't solve this problem only on the revenue side. You can't solve it only on the spending side. And for those who want to just go back to the old model that we had, well, let's just wait for oil and gas to recover, and then we'll live off our resource royalties. Well, look, how did that work out for us when the prices collapsed? We've been in deficit ever since with no plan to get out of it. And this is what's leading us to this cascade of problems that will ultimately lead to insolvency. We're already at $3 billion in interest payments. $3 billion in interest payments. You could do a lot with $3 billion. And if interest rates double, so then we're up to $6 billion. And if they go even higher, I mean, they're at historic lows. If they go back to where they were when we were in, 10% interest rates, now all of a sudden you're paying, $12 billion in interest payments. At some point, the push it off to the next generation to worry about solution ends. And I do firmly believe that we're going to get another resource boom. But why would we waste it? Again, we had a model that worked with Peter Lougheed that everyone's so proud of, that Heritage Savings Trust Fund, where he saved a third of the resource revenues. And then finally, clients started inflation-proofing it. But it's pretty meager compared to what it would be if we'd stayed with that strategy. So if everyone loves that strategy and the Heritage Fund has become so untouchable, why is it we're not investing in the Heritage Fund and building a sovereign wealth fund the size of Norway's or the size of Alaska's? Why is it that we're allowing our politicians to spend every single penny of it rather than shepherd it for our future? So those to me are kind of the three big things that we've got to figure out how to solve and how to do differently if we're going to have a different outcome.
So I trust you have solutions.
I have solutions. I don't know how popular they're going to be. Well, let me try them out. So let me start with the revenue side, because this is something that I have felt strongly about for a number of years. Some people have, I think you asked me, how long were you working on this paper? And I did start writing it in February, but I really have been working on it for my entire time in media and advocacy and public policy. And the notion of building the Heritage Savings Trust Fund up to a level where it's generating enough investment income so that it can provide a long-term reliable revenue source. I think maybe the first time I wrote about that was in 2001, and it was stimulated from an idea and work that had been done by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, which incidentally our premier used to work for. I don't think you worked for it at the time, but that gives you an idea of some of the work that the taxpayers has done on this in the past. And so think about how powerful this could be. And I mapped out the numbers, because you never know what's going to happen going forward. But what if we put the strategy in place after the financial collapse in 2008-9. So just looking at the last 10 or 12 years or so, well, we could have grown that Heritage Savings Trust Fund to a size that's 3 times its size. And guess what happens? When it's 3 times its size, it'd be generating 3 times the investment income that it is right now. It's a matter of making some of those sacrifices today so that you have something in the future. And rather than have compound interest work against you, as it does when you have debt, have it working for you, so that you can continue to grow your wealth alongside the growth in the economy. So that to me is kind of central to it. And so the way I think it should be structured, and again, like some of this is just borrowing good ideas from the past that were never properly implemented. We used to have this idea that we knew that resource revenues were volatile. So we should never develop an operational spending reliance on them. So the initial idea that came through with the Fiscal Sustainability Act years ago, or Fiscal Responsibility Act and Sustainability Fund years ago, was that you would never spend more than a certain amount on operational spending, and then the rest of it you would put aside in savings. So save half for use half for capital purposes, because we know that we've got a long-term infrastructure program that we need to keep up with, and use half for savings. If we had just taken that approach, we would be at that point now where we were generating more than $4 billion in investment income. And to me, that's the way that you create a new revenue stream without creating new taxes for individuals. And so the best time to have started that was in the Lougheed days and carrying it on. Second best time would have been in the Klein era and carrying that on. The third best time is now. Now that we're at a point where resource revenues were as low as they've ever been, $2 billion last year, let's bite the bullet and say, okay, we will never use more than $2 billion in our resource revenue, and we will either save the rest or use it on capital spending in equal proportion or some other formula, and let's grow it so that 10 years from now, we can be having a different conversation. But the time to do that is now, so that we do not allow our politicians to get used to having windfall revenues, because with oil going up, with pipelines getting built, with LNG exports and Coastal GasLink being finished, and we're plugged into that system with more uses for methane. We have the ability to really capitalize on this next surge, and I just do not want to see our governments waste it.
So, we're at a very interesting time from a government standpoint, which is, we've got this 4-year vote cycle. Mm-hmm. We have a public that uses it's called king killing. So we put people on a pedestal so we can get a better shot at them. And so it's a very difficult, very difficult job to be in politics and to try to implement good ideas like you're suggesting when you're caught up in those pieces. And so, part of me says this really has to happen from outside versus inside, because the inside, and all due respect to very good people who put their names forward and run, but you can see they're living in a fishbowl, and everybody's trying to catch them doing something wrong. And so whatever you do, you're going to be condemned. We need to get this offensive energy going again. So what's the advice to the government, or how do we restructure our government so that we can do this?
Well, one of the, I've got two other areas that are probably going to get a bit more pushback, and it goes to your point about why it is good ideas end up dying in government, unfortunately, and dying in political parties. So we almost ran on this idea in 2012 when I ran for political office, the idea of creating health spending accounts. And gosh, we went around the circle of my my core strategy group about how do we communicate the idea that government would take a certain portion of their revenues, call it $375, and they would deposit it in a health spending account, and you can use it for any of the things that healthcare doesn't currently cover, and then build on that idea so that people would have their employer contribute to that fund, and they'd be able to contribute to that fund, and it would roll over in future years so that you could save up for bigger ticket items that aren't covered, like braces if you don't have a dental plan that covers your kids' braces, or laser eye surgery, which isn't covered, or any number of things that we know people want to pay for in their healthcare but have a hard time paying for. And at the time, politics prevailed. It was, gosh, this is just going to be too complicated to try to explain during an election campaign. The groundwork hasn't been paid for this. People might not be familiar with them. They might not know what they are. And that the folks on who are opposed to you, who want to keep things exactly as they are going to try to dismiss this as trying to bring in two-tier healthcare. So it didn't end up making it into the policy document, but darn it, I wish it had, because I think that's how long ago the conversation needed to start on that. So that's sort of the second thing, is that if we do not want a sales tax, and we do not want the government to have massive cuts to the programs that we care so much about, then we have to find other ways to pay for the things that we care about. And so if you create this system, and here are the hard parts. Here I'll tell you right whose ox I'm goring, so that you know where the pushback is going to be. One of the oxes that I'm goring here is the GPs, the frontline doctors. Right now, I think it's like $37 a visit, and it's 100% covered by healthcare. What if we made a different approach? What if instead of paying for that 100% with the government paying it directly, what if they deposited the money in your health spending account and you paid your doctor out of your health spending account when you visited? They'd give you a nice little debit card. It would have your name and face on one side, like a driver's license, and then you'd swipe it and $37 would come out of your account. Well, you can imagine. I mean, I'm sure that there's a reason why we wouldn't move to that system, or because I think you can imagine that people do like the system the way it is. But I'll tell you from a consumer perspective, what it would do is I might decide, you know what, I don't actually need to see my doctor. I need to see my physiotherapist instead, because my shoulder's sore and it's just better for me to go to a physiotherapist. Or I might decide after this year of COVID lockdowns, I kind of actually need to see a psychologist instead to kind of work through some of the anger I'm feeling about having been shut down and locked up for 15 months. Or maybe you'd want to see a nutritionist, because I think there's more than a few of us who got the COVID 15 pounds piled on. Maybe you'd want to go see a nutritionist or a dietitian. But that's the point, is that if you seed the money in an individual health spending account, it's up to each person to decide what health services they need in a given year. And quite frankly, I think I've only seen a family doc once in the last 5 years, but I've gone to all of those other types of practitioners. And so why don't we make the system more comprehensive by allowing people more choice of the type of services that they want to provide, providing them the means to pay for it, and allowing employers and nonprofits, in the case of those who are low income, you could have nonprofit groups who would raise money, who would be able to help fund somebody in their medical savings account so they could have access to those services too. So to me, that would be the way that you would fund it, and you would broaden it out. You could make it more comprehensive. And because you're providing $375, I think that calculates out to about 10 GP visits. So I'd be hard pressed to think that anybody would need more than would go to a GP more than 10 times in a year. So I think you'd be hard pressed to say that that would create a barrier to access. But the innovation it would unlock would be amazing.
Now, it's a good idea until you get to a catastrophic illness, right? So you're talking about proactive healthcare, where I go for an appointment because I think I need some help. But how do you deal with the big ticket issues, right?
Well, here's the other side of it. I had somebody send me a note when I told them that we were going to be talking about this today, saying, "Oh, I wish we'd go back to the day when government would send you an invoice, or not an invoice, a statement every year of how much money was spent on your healthcare." Because I think that this transparency is something that we're missing out on. We don't know how much anything costs, quite frankly. It's free because it's free to us. And one of the things that having a health spending account does is it brings the costs associated with the services to the fore. And then individuals can make choices about what they value more. And that's important for that. But when you get to catastrophic coverage, look, this is what Tommy Douglas had said when he initially proposed the healthcare system. He didn't think it should cover every little thing. He just wanted it to cover the big things. He didn't want a family to face bankruptcy or financial hardship, or worse, choose not to get the medical assistance and the surgery that they needed because of a barrier from a financial point of view. So I still think that you can maintain the system as a publicly administered catastrophic insurance program. That's fine. But maybe we need to start talking about deductibles. And there's a couple of reasons you do deductibles. One is to bring more money into the system. And the other is to actually create the transparency that we need around how much things cost. Because guess what? If you get a knee replacement and you have to pay a $500 deductible, then it's going to appear on your statement what the total cost of that surgery is. And so having that transparency and cost allows you to ask some questions about it as well, and allows for the government to also know what the costs are, which allows them to do some comparisons and allows them to consider whether they should be opening up individual charter hospitals that deal with different services. So it's the price transparency that's so important. That's the thing that is the miracle of the market. When people know what things cost, it influences their decisions. We've got a system that's a big black box. No one knows how much anything costs. And so no one knows how to find ways to have efficiencies. For all we know, there's a hospital that is performing these surgeries at a really cut rate because they've managed to find some efficiency. Shouldn't we know that so that other hospitals would be able to learn from that and follow suit? So the idea of deductibles is a tricky one. And I understand why, is because you don't, again, want to create something that is going to be a barrier. But that being said, in British Columbia, they have fees associated with their healthcare system. In Ontario, they have fees associated with their healthcare system based on income. In Alberta, we used to have a single cost and a family cost on healthcare premiums. So what if you, through your health spending account, if you had a major surgery, if you're a low-income individual, say up to $75,000, there's no deductible. But if you earn $75,000 to $150,000, you have a $500 deductible. If you have $150,000 or more in income, it's a $1,000 deductible. We have to get some notion back that the system needs to be funded, but it doesn't necessarily have to be funded through general tax dollars. We all have to have a role to play in paying a portion of the cost to keep ourselves healthy and to keep ourselves well. And so to me, creating a system, this would be a structural change. If we all recognize that we've got this behemoth of healthcare that just keeps growing and growing and growing, and the demands for services keep growing and growing and growing, why don't we find a different way to pay for it that isn't a sales tax, that will make it more responsive, that will allow for us to have a broader range of coverage, and will create all of the right incentives for us to create that kind of price transparency. So to me, the idea of a medical health spending account would be the starting point for that. One more thing I'd just add, John, is that when I was briefly in politics, I discovered that the provincial government already provides this for their staff. So I'd be hard pressed for the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees to say, well, we kind of like our health spending account, but we don't think that this is a good idea for Albertans as a whole. I think we've got to find a way to make sure that everybody has this. And I know that there's also a number of private companies that provide this for their workers, and a lot of private companies who already provide this. Well, you could integrate the system so that rather than creating a government-sponsored and managed health spending account, they could just make a deposit into a health spending account that you already have. Or you can have a choice of having one that's administered by government. But we have the expertise out there. We've already had companies figure this out. We've already had practitioners figure this out. We've already had patients figure this out. So why not make it available to everyone and then really kickstart a transformation of our healthcare system?
The word choice keeps coming up, and ultimately, it's probably the crux of this whole discussion. Is you find out what people value when they are in a position of choice. Right? They'll choose this or that, and we do deal with it every day. We choose our behaviors. We choose who we deal with when we purchase something, and so this premise of giving people choice really does kind of allow you to or allow them to share with us what they value. And so I'm hearing that in a lot of your discussion around the healthcare is how do we create this point of choice, because that's really where you find out about value. And like you say, my daughter ended up in the hospital when we were in Florida. Well, we got a bill from the nurse, from the doctor, from the hospital. The whole thing was, luckily we had some insurance for it. But it was, we had to pay each of these bills to each of these groups. Well, you knew what it cost to, be rehydrated because she was dehydrated. It was expensive, turns out.
It is expensive, but it's everybody has a different context, which is why, I may as well float the idea and then I can be the punching bag or the bullseye for people to tell me why it won't work. But my context is that I've almost all the healthcare I've paid for privately. So I had laser eye surgery in 1999 and I had to pay for that privately. I had braces 3 times. It didn't work until the last one. So I had to pay for that privately because I was too old by the time I got braces for it to be covered by my parents' health program. I used to have skin treatments that weren't covered. So I had to pay for those out of my own pocket. And I like, I'm kind of a healthy living kind of gal. So I pay for my vitamin B and my omega-3s and my turmeric. I kind of like paying for those kind of things. So I have been prepared to put my own dollars towards my healthcare. And I think a lot of people are. In fact, Trina sent me a note before we got on today saying, oh, well, you're talking about transforming healthcare. Can we talk about transforming it from a sickness system to a wellness system? And that is fundamental to changing it. That's what a health spending account does, is that most of the things that are covered are deemed not to be essential, right? But they're also, if you scratch the surface, they're also preventative. If you go for a chiropractic treatment, or you go to your massage therapist, or you go to your physio, a lot of that is to prevent things from getting worse so that you don't need to get surgery or hospitalized or whatever down the line. And so if we can have more spending at the front end and fund that in even just a modest way, but allow people to spend more of their own money. Maybe if you contribute to a medical health spending account, maybe that's a tax write-off for you, so that you can actually get the benefit of doubling your dollars when you put it in there, so that you can save up for some of these things that you really want to do. But to me, that's the other side of it, is that we wait and wait and wait and wait until somebody gets sick enough to be hospitalized, and then we deal with it. What if we were to fund the things at the front end that allow people to do more prevention, so that we can take the load off our hospital system and take the load off our surgical system? That to me is really the long-term benefit of creating a plan like this, is that you won't see that in year one, the fact that you've got a healthier population that puts less burden on the sickness management part of the system, but you'll see it in the long run. But you won't see any of those benefits unless you provide the incentive and the means for people to start investing in that end.
Well, and we have a groups of millennials and all the different age groups coming along who are paying attention to health a lot more than my generation was, right? Or we let it fall off. They seem to be continuing, if gyms are open, to go to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a concept, actually, Eastern medicine really focuses on getting people back in balance, not addressing the symptoms. And so, so much of our Western medicine has been symptom based, right? You feel sick, you go to the hospital.
Yeah.
Why don't we get people back in balance? And so much of the, the teaching, and I think you can feel the shift to some degree, but I think, your thoughts are, how do we push that further and quicker? And it does have all sorts of cost implications in terms of us being able to reduce that.
Sure does. Well, just on that point, just to add 2 things that are not covered by healthcare right now: a dietitian and any mental health counseling that you might get. So you've got to pay for that unless you've got a government or a privately funded plan. Those are 2 things that you don't have access to that will be paid for. And yet, if you ask most people what they probably need the most now that we're about to get back into reopening, most people probably need a diet tune-up. I would probably really benefit from seeing a nutritionist instead of a family doctor. And, I think probably all of us could talk through some of the issues that we had and to see a counselor and have that paid for. And so also different times call for different things. And those are the kind of preventative measures that we've decided are not essential enough to cover. And that's I think the fundamental thing that I'm trying to get across here. Government has already made a determination that certain services are ones that you should pay for yourself. And to me, it's entirely arbitrary. So if it's arbitrary, why don't we create a system where people have the means to pay for the healthcare that they need based on their own choices, and then we allow them to make those choices and see what happens. That to me is the exciting part, is that you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what entrepreneurs will come up. You don't know what kind of changes will occur. But if you change the structure, going back to your original thought, where it's patient driven and it's practitioner driven, you don't need a bunch of central planners and a bunch of bureaucrats figuring this out, because people will figure it out themselves.
And more of the money gets to the actual activity of health care, not sickness.
Completely.
healthcare. And so we already have a private system. It's just a matter of which pieces are private, right? Whether it's mental health, whether it's the dentist, and then people have plans. Some people have plans to be able to pay for them.
So let's talk about how you can then change the conversation, right? Instead of it being public versus private, it's what gets paid for 100% by government through your catastrophic insurance coverage that is publicly funded and publicly administered, and what services get paid for through your health spending account. And that is partially funded by government, partially funded by your employer, and partially funded by you. And so then it becomes a matter of what fits into which box. What is the right thing to have as catastrophic coverage? And maybe you have an idea in your mind that anything that costs, I don't know, more than $1,000, I'm just throwing that out there. Maybe that's something that is such a high price that most people, especially modest income people, wouldn't be able to afford. So maybe that's where the cutoff is. And then anything below that, it's a combination. And so but I think that's a more sensible conversation to have, because we have to get back to what we were originally trying to do with our public healthcare system. It was not so that we could have government pay for every little thing associated with keeping us healthy and preventing us from getting sick. It was to make sure that we didn't have bankruptcies or financial hardship because people didn't have the ability to pay. And if we go back, if that's the original concept that Tommy Douglas put forward, let's figure out if we can restructure the system around those lines.
So we got to watch our time here a little bit. The healthcare piece, we've talked about the Heritage Trust Fund or some form of managing our revenues when they come in on that. What else do we need to do to have Alberta hum?
So the last area, and this is the hardest part, I think. So we've got a $12 billion structural deficit we need to solve. So I proposed $4 billion comes from saving our resource revenue and building that up so that we have investment income as a stream. I proposed $4 billion comes from new dollars out of our own pockets in user fees, but through the form of a health spending account, so that we are putting our own money towards our own healthcare rather than see it dumped into the current publicly funded system. So the last area is we have to hold our public service to account. They're underperforming, and I think that is evident when you look at the fact that they continue to get more dollars, hire more people, and we're not getting better performance. And we have to ask the reasons for why that is. And it could be, as you mentioned, John, like the structure is one that might be initiative killing. It might not allow for people who have creative ideas to have them rise to the top. It may be that we have to hire too many managers to manage managers to manage managers, because once you get a system that complex, you can't let anyone make a decision without it going up through 5 layers of managers. And I just want to tell you a couple stories on that so that you understand why I have such frustration with the top-down management approach. I remember going to visit a hospital in southern Alberta, small hospital. They didn't have the authority to order a bottle of bleach from the local home hardware so that they could augment their cleaning supplies. They had to go through some kind of central procurement. How can that possibly be that you don't that a manager of a hospital in a rural district doesn't have the authority to do that? When I went up into the Grand Prairie area as well, another hospital up there that needed to have the light bulbs in the emergency waiting room changed, they had to put in a requisition to the local health authority to send out an electrician to change the light bulbs. And these should not be happening. That kind of micromanagement is part of the reason why I think people feel frustrated and powerless in the system. And it certainly wouldn't happen if you had local site-based decision-making. And so it may be that we have given now this public monopoly enough latitude to try to change things from within, and they haven't been able to. So the best way to try to get new ideas implemented is you hire an entrepreneur, right? And so I think that there's a huge opportunity to establish charter hospitals. And the Premier has made that possible through legislation. I don't know if anyone has started an application. I do know a doc in my hometown has already built a facility with the idea that one of the floors could be turned into a surgical suite. But boy, navigating through the process is going to be the challenge. But when you think about this, it's really taking the same kind of approach that we did with education. It was controversial at the time too, because monopolies like to be monopolies. They don't like competition. They don't like losing students in the case of K-12 education, which is where we first tried charter schools. But I'm going to just give you an example of what I think is just a wonderful model for how charter schools can influence the public system to the positive. So look at Foundations for the Future Charter School. They started off with a single campus, and their idea was, let's go back to having kids being taught in rows, learning at their own pace, making sure that they can read well starting in kindergarten. Let's just get back to the basics, the kind of way, you know, a lot of us remember being taught as kids. And there was a lot of pushback to that type of approach. Well, where are they today? I think they are up to 4 campuses, maybe 5. They're building a new high school. They have thousands of kids on the waiting list. And the Calgary Board of Education saw that there was so much enthusiasm for this program, they created their own traditional learning centers so that kids had access to that within the public system as well. And that's how charters should work. So if you establish a charter hospital, then it can always carry over. If they find some way of delivering hip and knee replacements that is more effective, then that can spread out into any hospital that's doing hip and knee replacements. I've talked to new moms about the frustration that they have. You're kind of in and out within hours in a lot of cases when you give birth these days. I remember my mom had us at the Grace Hospital in Calgary, and you used to be able to be there for a few days so that you could deal with any issues of postpartum depression. You've got this new person in your life dealing with issues about how that's going to integrate into your family. Why not have specialized charter birthing centers so that you can create an experience that's better for new moms? Why not create a center that's like a Mayo Clinic North? You could have one up in Edmonton. You could have one in Calgary as well. So that if you've talked to anybody who's gone to a Mayo Clinic, one of the things they value is that they show up with a problem. I knew someone who went down because they had vertigo. And what they did is they ran them through a series of tests, 12 different specialists, and they came up with a diagnosis at the end of a single day. There's no reason why we couldn't do that. Why couldn't we have a professional diagnostic center that would have all the specialists you need in one spot so that you can get a diagnosis in one day rather than wait months and months and months between specialist appointments? I've talked as well to those who've got children with rare diseases. And then once they get diagnosed, they get this bill that it's $1 million in order to get the specialized treatment for them. What if we created a charter hospital that had a specialty around rare diseases and attracted kids from around the world so that you had enough people that you could negotiate with the big pharma companies about creating a pharmaceutical approach that was more cost effective for families? I mean, this is the thing. We don't know what entrepreneurs would develop. Those are just a few things that I as I was sitting here brainstorming, thinking I'd like to see. And why wouldn't we allow for that? Why wouldn't we want some kind of entrepreneur to come along with a totally different approach and say, I think I can do this better? And you know, maybe it begins as a challenge to the publicly funded healthcare system, but it can end in delivering some really positive, innovative ideas that we would all benefit from if somebody can find the right pathway. And when you talk about frontline workers, I can't imagine anything more demoralizing than only having one employer to sell your services to, so that you know whether you work at Alberta Health Services in Grand Prairie or in Edmonton or in Calgary or in Medicine Hat, it's the same bosses and the same process and the same scheduling and staffing issues no matter where you go. If you have charter hospitals and charter approach, then you create more opportunity for staff members to have a different type of environment to work into. In fact, when you look at Sweden, which we always like to look to as a model for how we should deliver healthcare services, their nurses union was the biggest supporter of choice because they recognized that it was good for their members to have a multitude of different places to sell their labor to. So I don't think that this needs to be something that the health sector needs to be hostile to. I would hope that they would be champions of it, that they would be pushing for these kinds of things as opposed to the traditional stance that's been taken in the past, because we need to do better. We need to do something different. I think that we've demonstrated in the last year as Albertans, there's a lot of deference. When the Premier said, we've got to make sure that we don't overstress our health system, boy, Albertans responded in a huge way. They were prepared to give up everything to make sure that we didn't push the system to a breaking point. Now it's time for something in return. It's we are prepared to support the system, but the system has to do better. It has to be innovative. It has to deliver services better. It has to be willing to try new things. It has to allow entrepreneurship and innovation and new approaches. That to me is the quid pro quo. I think we'll continue funding the services that we care about, but that we have to start seeing a delivery method that's actually going to be truly patient-centered and truly responsive to the needs of communities on the ground and the people working in those facilities. And we don't have that with the system we've got right now.
Now, Danielle, the argument is going to come back, particularly because we represent a business organization, is, well, why don't you just charge the businesses more, right? You've cut the corporate tax rate. Why don't you just drive it back up, and it will cover the $12 billion shortfall? How would you answer that?
I think this is always the real problem, right? Is that everybody thinks someone else should pay. It shouldn't be me. It should be someone else who pays. It should be those big rich corporations, or it should be that really wealthy guy. It shouldn't be me. And I would put it to you this way: when you look at the numbers for what has happened when we've had periods of calamity, the thing that actually is the most stable form of revenue is personal income tax. The thing that is an unstable form of revenue is corporate income tax and resource royalties. We know that as well. So why would you build the foundational base for a service that everybody cares so much about on a volatile revenue stream? That doesn't make any sense. You would actually be better off creating more opportunities for more employment, more tax-paying individuals on the personal income tax side, so that you can generate that revenue. When you charge corporations taxes that are too high, guess what they don't do? They don't invest in expansion. They don't hire more workers, and so you don't end up generating more revenue. What happens as well when you're looking at user fees, I think, is that you create that connection with the person and the service that is being delivered. If your employer pays for your services on your behalf, why does the practitioner you're dealing with have they don't have the same incentive to give you the very best possible service as if you're paying yourself, right? And so there's a reason why you want to restore the patient-doctor relationship and the payment relationship. There should be some consequences, that if you get bad service, you can take your money elsewhere, literally. If you keep getting paid, regardless of the service that you deliver, you're just not going to get the kind of creative approach that happens when you have those different incentives in place. So I know it's attractive to think that somebody else should pay our way, but you know what? We should at least be willing to pay a portion of the cost, because it's our own health. I mean, we have a benefit in doing so, and it's even if it's just a modest amount. I believe that there's something really powerful about making sure that the customer has that direct relationship with the people who are providing that service.
So, I think you mentioned earlier the individual tax revenue is $12 billion in our provincial budget, and the corporate, I think, is probably a third of that. It would seem to me that if we can implement all of the things that you're talking about, we want to drive the number of people who have jobs and that are paying personal income tax. So we grow that by 10%. That's a huge contribution to the bottom line. If we can then start to introduce personal responsibility to many of the systems that we've just, again, taken for granted, and everything that comes free is worth what you paid for it. And so I've got kids that are in their 20s. I want them to have the Alberta that I grew up in, which is a land of opportunity. And I think we're sitting on the front edge of an extraordinary opportunity for Alberta, and I want to give my kids and their kids, the world of Alberta, the same place of blessing and opportunity. We've got the resources, we've got the ingenuity, we've got that cultural fabric that you talked about. So can you summarize a little bit where the world goes from here?
I think Alberta really is poised to do better than any other jurisdiction, and it's because it goes back to what we were talking about. There's just a culture here that we're willing to try new things, and we're willing to fail. In some ways, isn't that the most important part? Is that failure is nothing more than a learning experience. There are some people who are desperately afraid to fail, so afraid to fail they won't take any risks, and I think that that's what characterizes our bureaucracy. Is they couldn't possibly take a risk, but look at all the innovation that you're foregoing as a result of being so darn risk averse. And so if we can just get, we're very close to being able to reopen. I mean, I think so, speaking of Professor Trevor Toombs, I think he calculated that we could be reaching the targets on vaccination by June the 7th. So we could be fully open by June the 21st. So we could spend a lot of time talking about all the ways in which we were wronged in the last year. And many people have many grievances for a lot of good reasons. Or we could say, okay, we're the first out of the gate in Alberta. We can get going. We can launch. We can get together. We can have business meetings. We can collaborate. We can travel. We can go and look at interesting ideas that are happening around the world, and we can talk about the exciting opportunities that are in Alberta, and we can bring back some exciting opportunities that are elsewhere. We shouldn't rest on our laurels. We should use this period of calamity to do what we always have in the past. This one's no different. In the kind of economic hardship it's created. We've had these kinds of economic hardships through different means before, but we control our response to it. And so for me, looking at the way in which we can talk up our free enterprise sector, we can talk up our nonprofit sector, we can motivate and encourage our government agencies to match that same level of innovation. We've got a young population. It seems to me like we have the ability to allow for things to fire on all cylinders, and we can do a really great job, I think, of rebranding and repositioning Alberta to the rest of the world. People's eyes will be on us, right? Because because we are the first ones out of the gate. Every other premier and every other province, they're going to have restrictions for a lot longer. So why not take advantage of being the first in Canada to do that and start looking towards opportunities? And I think if we do that, and I know there's a lot of issues that people are working through. I have a site on locals where I get feedback pretty unvarnished about how upset people are. But I think that what I've always observed is that we always do our best when we channel our energy into something really positive. And so I'm feeling really optimistic that we've got the right people, the right culture, the right factors, the money, the investment, the care about each other and community. I just feel like Alberta is such a special place, and we're going to have a chance to show everybody that in just a few short weeks.
Danielle, thank you for sharing your insights, and congratulations on the publishing of this document. It's going to create conversation, and that's what our intent is with the podcast. Is we want to put information out and let people make decisions. And Alberta Enterprise Group just firmly believe that entrepreneurs are going to lead us through this. We have so much respect and admiration for the resilience and the strength and the ingenuity. And so I think what you're going to see come out of this is the entrepreneurs are going to lead us through. We're really excited about being part of it. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stay tuned for future podcasts. Every Thursday at noon, we'll be doing them. Sometimes it'll be me, and sometimes it'll be Danielle. And together, we're going to try to drive this province. So everybody have a great day, and looking forward to Alberta being open for business very soon.